Hey guys, welcome to the Be Legendary podcast by Sorinex. I am Bert Sorin, and I'm here with my good friend, client, and just all around just dude in the iron game that I really respect, and that's Bo Sandoval. Welcome, Bo.
Hey Bert, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. It's good to jump on anything that's called Be Legendary. I'm trying to figure that out daily in life. So this is the first step of this podcast.
Heck yeah, man. So a little bit about Bo. So Bo and I have known one another for years and kept trying to do some work together. There was always a mutual respect, or at least there was respect coming from my end. Maybe he just thought I was the weirdo with the beard, but that's cool. And then finally, we were able to work together on a project recently at the UFC, and that's kind of where it's gone. But we'll Tarantino this a little bit, and I want you to tell the listeners a little bit more about who you are and where you've been in your coaching career, because this certainly isn't your first gig. You've been in the coaching world, the collegiate coaching world, for a really long time and really involved in strength and human performance. Sure. So love to hear a little bit about your journey through this crazy world of human performance.
Sure. Well, originally I'm from the South. I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and doing Louisiana kind of things, grew up hunting and fishing and be outside quite a bit. Both of my parents kind of kept us active and pretty blue collar as kids growing up. So found the weight room in high school, playing high school sports, football and track and field. And, not a ton of instruction, but we did at least have coaching staffs and things that had an expectation that we needed to spend some time in the weight room. And so I can remember being in high school and watching, the old DVDs from Nebraska Husker football and looking at the Husker Power program and ninth grade football players trying to emulate, that powerhouse of a program back then was a pretty good time.
Yeah. Now, were you in high school? Was that in the mid-90s?
Yes. So I got done with high school in 99.
Okay.
96 to 99. And then.
Oh, yeah. So you were there right at the hot point where Husker was the jam. They were crushing, and that was the human performance college basically during 96 through 99.
Yep, that was right before Nick Saban came through LSU and they started winning national championships. But my heart was breaking every year back then for LSU football, and they were just watching Nebraska killing it up there. So. I went to school at Southern Mississippi, did my undergrad and graduate degrees in exercise science at Southern Miss. Just a little detour. I actually started out at Northwestern State, Louisiana, was there for a semester and had applied to an on-campus job, and they put me out the softball fields cutting grass. So for someone who didn't have a major and didn't know what they were doing yet, I was like, sweet, my school was already paid for. I had an in-state scholarship program. So I'm like, I can make some weekend beer money by cutting grass out at the baseball and softball fields. So
that's a very accurate depiction of that stage in your life. It's like, I could do some menial thing for beer money. And that's,
yep. My parents were like, look, we'll help you with some gas money. But other than that, if you're going to live off campus and you do all that kind of stuff, you gotta figure out a way to make money to take care of your groceries and your rent and all that stuff. So yeah, in the midst of that, the softball coach approached me one day. She said, hey, I need an equipment manager. Would you be interested in doing that? We can pay for your school. And I said, well, my school's already paid for. And she was like, well, I can just give you an hourly wage. It was like, deal, let's do it. So
perfect.
You start out doing laundry and taking care of the field and doing all that kind of stuff. Well, a couple of weeks into it, I noticed the team going down into the weight room for scheduled workouts. So I asked the coach, I was like, that sounds cool. Do you mind if I just go watch them and see what they're doing? And ended up meeting the strength coach at the time. His name was Thad Livingston, and just observing and watching the girls. And then eventually I was like, hey, do you care if I watch, like the football team a little bit, or the baseball team, the track and field team? And he was good with it. He was like, yeah, just kind of, stay out of the way and wait, hold all your questions till things get done, and, no problem. So I started to understand that this was a profession and that there was a lot of thought that went into it. And in a very, in its infancy stage in my head of understanding that you could do this for a living. So anyhow, that softball coach ended up taking the head job at Southern Miss a semester later and invited me for the same opportunity. Be an equipment manager. I'll take care of your school. It's closer to your home. It was only, I think Southern Miss was about an hour and 50 minutes away, something like that. And, Natchitoches was like 3 hours away. I was like, that could be cool. I'll stay a little closer to home. But can you get my foot in the door with the strength staff, like as soon as we make the switch? She's like, yeah, no problem. So by the time I had moved and gotten all my stuff down there, she already had a meeting set up for me. So I went in and met with Charlie Dudley and Chaucer Funchess at the time. They had been there for, I think, 3 or 4 seasons up to that point. They were starting to pick up some momentum. They had a couple of big upset wins over back then in Alabama. And, so the program was kind of on a rise with Jeff Bauer. And so anyhow, I met with those guys, and pretty much they were like, all right, here's the first step. You can come in. You got to be here at 5 a.m. We're in a temporary gym because they were building a new facility, a new field house. So I had to go into this old gymnasium at 5 a.m. First thing I had to do was sweep all the leaves out of it because the doors didn't fully shut. We had all these leaves blowing in there. But, filling up water jugs manually in the showers and putting ice in them and putting that stuff out. And then the rest of the time, arms were folded off in the corner, just kind of watching and taking notes for a couple of weeks. And then they started letting me kind of assist and help out, and were kind of taking me through, just quizzing me and seeing what I knew about exercise technique and what I knew about, monitoring intensity and seeing if a guy's going hard or is a guy kind of dogging reps and things like that. So I did that for almost 3 full years as an intern with Southern Miss Strength and Conditioning, working with I think they had about 16 different programs at the time. And we helped with all of them. And then later on, they offered me a graduate assistant position to take care of my graduate school and also allow me to continue to accumulate experience in coaching. So ended up being a solid move down to Southern Miss and getting some really good tutelage. Some of my teammates along the way too. I mean, Josh Stoner, who was at home with Pat Ivy at Missouri for years and years. Josh was a graduate student when I started there, so I got to train with Josh and help him with his teams. Brian Wiseman, who's now the director of Olympic Sports Strength and Conditioning at Ole Miss, was my roommate, and I lived with him for a while he was a grad student and I was an intern coming up. Wow. Melissa Moore, who's the assistant director at LSU, she's been with Tommy Moffitt for about 15 years now. She was my other classmate. We were GAs at the same time. So some really good professionals coming up through the ranks, and I was able to kind of just study under them. Keith Caton was another one.
Wow, you guys were loaded.
Man, it was sick, right? So
yeah. Well, here's my question. Go ahead.
As I was coming up trying to figure out, what am I going to do for jobs? I'm looking at all these guys being really successful and climbing their way through the industry a little bit. And I just, in the back of my head, I was like, I'll be all right. The things I'm learning and the people that I'm learning from, it's good enough to kind of get my foot in the door and I'll be all right. I just got to keep moving forward. So that's how it got started. And then from there, man, I just kept my head down, worked, looked for opportunities. And out of grad school, they had, within the previous 3 years, built a pretty new weight room at Belhaven College, which I think you guys installed. Yep. I remember you telling me the story about hauling racks through a muddy swamp.
Hauling racks, muddy. Yeah, that was, I can't remember if that was 1999 or 2000, but yeah, when we were moving the equipment in that day, somehow they broke the water main and it flooded the entire parking area, and we had to carry equipment between ankle and knee deep water in, take off our shoes, walk it barefoot into the room. And yeah, that was one of those days you were just glad when it was over. But so yeah, you're probably lifting on some of that old gear years later. I would think so.
I took that job I started in the summer of 2005. And
yep, sure.
It was funny. They called Charlie Dudley and they were asking him like, hey, we're looking for a strength coach. This will be our first full-time strength coach that we've had. And they've had some part-times and some volunteers and other stuff. And they were like, we're looking for someone with 15 years of experience and has a pedigree and da-da-da-da for $22,000 and wants to work 70 hours a week. And Dudley was pretty honest with him. He's like, it ain't going to happen. You're not going to find that.
Right.
And he said, but I'll tell you what you do need. You need a young person who is not tied down to a family yet, who doesn't care about spending endless hours in there, who's hungry, and that's going to do things right. And so he kind of got him sold on that. And I was able to get an interview with him and then ended up fitting well into that position for about the next 3 years or so.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So it worked out. It was a great experience. again, coming from kind of a blue collar background, I mean, the first thing I had to do when I got in there, I had to take all that equipment out. I had to replace the floor. The floor had mold in it, and it hadn't been well kept. So
right.
Me and one of the donors there, he helped me procure the funds to get a floor in there, but we had to install it ourselves. We couldn't afford installation. So I kind of took it as, hey, there's an opportunity for ripping the floor out. I don't have an office right now. So I had done a little bit of masonry work previously. So I got somebody to donate me some cinder blocks. I had worked at a glass shop when I was at Southern Miss. So I had those guys donate me some windows. I built a little office inside, ran power to it. So I had a desk and a computer and all that kind of stuff. And then painted the whole inside of that thing, put all that equipment back in there, got all this stuff done before we started preseason training for football that fall. So that was kind of the first summer that I spent there.
So that's one of those things. I just want to kind of comment on a couple of things. First of all, there seems to be some sort of correlation or a frequency that you'll see a lot of these people in the strength world all seem to come out of similar nest or the same nest or the same tree. It's like you'll usually hear from people like, oh yeah, I was there with so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so that all have D1 jobs or, or some pretty big, big deal things. And it makes me wonder, first of all, was there a mentor there at the time? Was there a group dynamic or something that is almost like a training group? I found, like when I was at South Carolina, I was a decent athlete, but severely underdeveloped. But because that I was at South Carolina with some absolute freaks that we all kind of decided to be freaky, then we all rose to the next level. But I wonder, I see that in strength and conditioning, whether it's, you see these groups of GAs and assistants that all of a sudden you go, gosh, look at that. I mean, that's like the who's who of the strength world. And that was 15 years ago. So do you think there's these little pockets? And if so, what's the X factor? Is it a mentor? Is it an area? Is it the school is already kind of preloaded for success? Is it one or two pace setters or pace makers within that group? Or is it just blind luck and you catch lightning in a bottle and you don't know why you're all successful, and you just 15 years later you look and go, wow, I'm watching all my friends on TV also because we're all doing amazing stuff. Like that's the stuff I like to figure out how to predict that. And then we'll talk about some of the facility stuff in a minute. But I had to know this part because it seems like a common theme.
I think in our scenario is a combination of a couple things. Are you still there? Okay, yep. Sorry, I thought I lost you here. I think it was a couple different things in our scenario. One, I think all of the guys and gals that I had just mentioned, from the first day I met them, I always really strongly remember all of them asking why, like all the time. There was always a thorough discussion of why. And then when that might have been the why and it might have been accurate at the time, later on it would shift. And there would be a new reason why we're going to shift and we're going to go down this path and think about this. And Melissa Moore constantly had this headspace of trying to figure out what's a way to make this 2% better or 3% more accurate. Josh Owner, same way. Dude was constantly trying to pave a way of just being perfect. He wanted to be perfect at everything. That rubs off on you.
Sure.
Brian Wiseman is one of the best coaches I've ever been around in terms of asking why. He always, and he's been influenced and affected by a variety of different great personalities in the strength world. And we over the years, we've been able to converse and trade stories on some of these people we're being influenced by. Now, I mean, he's getting to spend a ton of time with John Smith down at Ole Miss track and field. I know he's having the time of his life.
Sure.
And, he was just always, I could always remember if there was anything I took away from him, it was always to ask why. And even if it seemed like an elite way to handle something, there could be a better way, or there could be So it always kept my mind open. And Charlie Dudley, I think for me anyway, was a catalyst for that. One of the best people always ask, like, is Charlie like your biggest mentor? And he knows why I answer this way. And I would say no, because one of the things that Charlie in the beginning told me was that instead of trying to focus on being a specialist, and instead of trying to focus on being, my guy or his guy or whatever, he was like, I would encourage you to get your ears exposed to as many different personalities in this business as you possibly can. And so he encouraged us on the weekends or during holidays or during the summertime to get in front of other coaches, to reach out and ask, hey, coach, I'm in Baton Rouge for a couple of weeks during the summer. Can I come and watch some training over at LSU? Can I just observe? Can we come down to Tuscaloosa and watch? Can we go out to Auburn and watch and observe? And, down in that area, there's great institutions all around. Well, there's also really special places like Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College, who's one of the biggest community college in terms of pumping big caliber talent into some of our major Division I programs. And so we had all these just awesome institutions to get around to if you were willing to ask the question. And Charlie always encouraged us to do that. So, don't get me wrong, 60% of the time we got told no. But another 40% of the time they're like, come on down. Here's when you can come in. Here's the limits of what you can do while you're here. And, for us, we just got more exposure as to what was going on. So,
yes.
As much as I'll say, yeah, Charlie probably, I wouldn't say he's my biggest mentor. He did mentor me in the idea of saying you need to get around and you need to see just how much is out there in this world.
To become an explorer. Yeah. He helped you become an explorer. That's what it sounds like to me.
So
yeah, I'd 100% agree. Like that, that I look back in a lot of the early groundwork that I made in the training world or whether it be throwing or whatever, and I always say burn the gas. And that's exactly what you did. You get in your car and you start driving, and by the time you realize it was a pretty far drive, you're halfway there. And then you're closer to being there anyway, so you might as well keep driving kind of deal. And so many people, and back then it was probably a little bit more difficult to, like, I don't know if YouTube or whenever, but when I was doing it was like no YouTube, no social media, whatever. So if you didn't have a cassette tape of some dude doing it, you just didn't know it existed. But, that was exactly that thing. You get in your car, like if you're at a competition or a meet, you stay over an extra day and you go train with a guy across the way. And I know a lot of people do that. I'm not saying that we were innovators in any way, but what I guess I want to reiterate, and sounds like that what you did was sometimes just the simplest thing of walking over to your neighbor's house and talking to him is the key.
Sure.
There is you don't have to church it up much more than that. Like, go over there and ask why. Why does this happen? Why does that happen? And I find it interesting that a similar magic bullet comes back many, many times. And it's usually just continuing to be that explorer and to be curious. And that's what I've always enjoyed talking with you is, you certainly are very capable, but there's a lot of questions that I think we ask one another back and forth. Some of them we probably already know the answers to, but sometimes, you get surprised when you get an answer that you didn't know was coming, and that was worth the entire trip, right?
It's one of those things where, to me, one of the things that makes this whole industry fun is it's coaching decisions. And so many times we get wrapped up in systems, like what system are you using for this? What system is this? When really, in a truly integrated model where we're trying to get the strength program to fit the needs and necessities of not only the sport, but the personnel and the coaching direction and all those things, it comes into these really fine-tuned coaching decisions. Because when you said, you might ask somebody and you might already know the why, like, why do you use this? Why do you do that? Where the difference is going to come in is to the scenario. It's to the context around how they're implementing it and why they're implementing it. And that recipe is different everywhere you go. If you got 10 Division I programs at all, they compete in the same sport, they get the same age group, all this kind of thing. The subtle differences revolve around timing and the dynamics of the coaching staff with the strength staff, with the medical team, and what kind of talent are we dealing with on the team? Right. And, so to me, that's the fun part. Now I know I take all these fundamental things that we've learned, make some quality coaching decisions and implement them so that they're appropriate and they hammer down the weaknesses that we're looking for with this particular personnel we're dealing with.
Yeah. It's like the system is the content and the team is the context. And you have to put those two together seamlessly, or you could definitely speak Greek to those kids or whoever you're with and be out of line for sure.
Yeah, totally. I think it boils down that way too when it comes to jobs and progressing in jobs and things. It really, I tell people all the time, like, because this is an industry where we still suffer from there are just a lot more people, a lot more coaches out there looking for jobs than there are jobs, even though there are more coaching opportunities in strength and conditioning now than there ever have been across the globe.
Sure.
But it's still, it's just an oversaturated area. So we get stuck in this trap where someone gets an opportunity, they feel like they have to take it because it fits them and that opportunity is in front of them, and maybe they need a job right then. Maybe they were previously let go or they're in a transition. Whereas I really try to coach people on being selective based on like, what do you want to do? What do you want your responsibilities to be? How much freedom do you want? How much creativity do you want to be able to employ? And people are scared to ask some of those questions when they're on these job interviews. So it's just the same thing about me asking a really experienced coach, why do you use RDLs right now? They feel like that's going to be offensive, where I kind of want to see like, what was the context to make him decide that he's going to use an RDL right now.
Sure.
Same thing when I go into a job interview or I'm looking at some of these opportunities. My first question is, how are you going to utilize me?
Yes.
Where do I fit into your big picture idea? Because once I understand where my value is and what they're going to deploy me to do, I'll know whether it's worth it for me or not.
Sure. And whether you could fulfill their needs and their expectations. You know, we talk about criteria all the time. If you don't know the criteria that you're being judged upon, you know, I say you get fired or frustrated really fast. And then, you know, if you come in and think you're a sets and reps guy, but they really need a juice guy just to pump everybody up, well, maybe you're going to do it wrong. Yeah. You know, and that's knowing the context and what you're walking into is absolute key. Mm-hmm. So I'll transition into this. So, yeah, I don't want to cut your background up, but you've been, you know, you ended up at the UFC. How did it go from there in Mississippi to ending up at the UFC? Sure. And you had a pretty big stop there for a minute or two at another well-known location. And how did all that content and context shake out?
Yeah, no problem. I'll give you the short version. So I after my time at Belhaven, I went through an interview process, and I just, on a whim, they were creating these new strength and conditioning coordinator positions at the Olympic Committee. I didn't really know much about it, but in the advertisement, it just mentioned a variety of sports. I want to say in the listing, I read like over 42 different sports that they'd be getting exposed to, and a lot of stuff that I wasn't familiar with. So I'm like, well, if this worked out, this could be cool. So I applied, went through a pretty rigorous process, ended up getting a position at the OTC in Colorado Springs, predominantly working with combat sports. So freestyle wrestling, Greco-Roman wrestling, boxing, judo, taekwondo, fencing, a few acrobatic sports as well, like figure skating and diving and men's gymnastics. So I would say that's where I got really involved with the combat sports world. For those who know me from the weightlifting world, that's also where I got much more involved with weightlifting. I was kind of I got the chance to be immersed in the weightlifting world while I was at the OTC, being around the resident coaches and athletes, and also training camps when other teams would come up and you'd have these world-renowned, you know, national team and former Olympic coaches coming through coaching camps at the OTC. So it was just a great time to absorb that world as well, which I got into some weightlifting coaching from that point forward for about the next 11 years, coaching a club of my own. So just not to sidetrack too much.
That's where you met your wife. Is that correct?
That is. That's exactly it. I met my wife. She was there as a resident weightlifter while I was there working with combat sports. And she, I mean, as much as she's amazing and, you know, she's my personal life and she's my backbone to kind of who I am. There was a lot of tutelage in terms of how much weightlifting I learned from that woman and her coach, who was John Coffey out of the state of Georgia. She was a whole nother coaching tree that I got to tap into as well.
Sure.
She was a 3-time world team member. I think she accumulated 4 national championships. She went to 3 Olympic trials, 2004, 08, and 2012. Was an alternate for the 2012 team. She awesome. Brought a lot to the table, not to mention from my network as well. She just got me exposed to more people that she was familiar with in that world.
Oh, sure. Sure. Coffee was an interesting guy, wasn't he?
John is he is a through and through hippie.
Yeah.
But in terms of weightlifting, not only the sport and how you coach it and get lifters ready for meets and how do you progress their training over time, which I think John, to this day, he's produced more female world team members in our country than any other coach, even though he's been inactive for the last few years due to some health issues. But the dude is a wealth of knowledge because of the people that he interacted with his over 40 years of coaching experience, from different Russian teams Bulgarian teams, Chinese teams. He just always had an in. And so he was having dinner with these people. Right. He was in their training halls. And so some of the best times I had was me and Amanda were going to visit her family. We stopped in Marietta for 2 days and trained with John.
Sure.
And while she was busting her ass, squatting and snatching and jerking, and I was over in the corner with John flipping through strength and health magazines from the 1960s, talking about a dude who's written in those pages that he sat and had dinner with, 2 weeks out from the World Championships in 1970.
Wow.
And I was like a kid in a candy store listening to him tell his stories and talk about where he picked up some of these tricks and some of these little mini systems that he was using depending on what his lifters were doing.
Well, what like you said, what a wealth of knowledge. I talked to John a couple times at some of the conferences, but the day that I threw my lifetime best in the hammer, I actually did a pre-meet lift, and I was throwing in Marietta, and I went over to John's, over to Coffee's gym, and did a little snatch potentiation lift, and got to talk to John for a little while. And I remember being late for the meet because I was having so much fun talking to John. I was hauling butt getting to just flew getting to the place. I was so late because you're getting to talk to a treasure of just knowledge, and I was like, gosh, I kind of wish I didn't have to compete right now. But I think the getting super fired up, trying to drive fast, thinking I was going to be late, I think it got my nervous system pretty cranked, and I had a lifetime best on my second throw. But I always remember having a snatch workout at John's and right before that. So yeah, what a cool place. I'd love to have him on a podcast sometime, or because I'm sure that guy's forgotten more than most people know about weightlifting.
Yeah, he he's getting back into observing a little more and chatting. He's had some health struggles over the last few years. He had a little stroke, but from Amanda gets to chat with him every once in a while. But if you ever get the chance to talk to that guy, I would imagine you're right. He probably forgot a few things, but he'll still be able to rattle some thoughts in your head, bringing up some old names and old meets and.
Cool. Yeah,
he's
very cool. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I was at the OTC until about 2009, and myself and Mike Favor, Mike got the opportunity to direct really the first real formal Olympic sports strength and conditioning program at Michigan, University of Michigan in Ann Arbor.
Right.
Invited me to come along and help him. They had a couple of strength coaches on staff that were helping some of the Olympic sports. They were just extremely outnumbered. I think there were just a couple of them working with close to 30 different sports. And so we spent the next almost 9 years building that into an 11-person staff that had 4 fellowship positions, as well as adding 2 additional weight rooms while we were there. And so a lot of growth. Obviously that's a lot of high caliber Division I experience in a variety of sports. As we were growing our staff, I had to bounce around quite a bit with helping different teams with stints. I say my most consistent were track and field and men's lacrosse throughout the duration that I was there, with us adding men's lacrosse. That's their first Division I program at Michigan ever. And but I did a 3-year stint with women's basketball. I was with diving for the first 2 years that I was there. And as we accumulated professionals, we started placing them, working with different sports throughout that program. We also added a couple of sports while we were there. So I think when I left, there were 32 Olympic sports at Michigan that we were servicing out of a couple of different weight rooms. But the way the UFC thing shook out was, I briefly mentioned the story before. Me and my wife kind of had the come to Jesus meeting where I had an opportunity, a couple different big institutions for director positions. NC State, Florida State. And, I just kept coming back to, it's not a better opportunity than what I had at Michigan, in terms of what Mike Faber was allowing me to do from a leadership standpoint and a coaching standpoint, but also with our facility build outs and getting involved in those processes, with dealing with our ADs and getting into conversations around governance and how we're going to utilize the strength staff with some of our upper executive, athletic directors and things. And so it was just really tough to leave. So I'd go through these rigorous interview processes, and then I'd come back home and my wife was like, well, what'd you think? I'm like, I told him no. And she would just be like, man, you put me on a roller coaster ride. Are we coming? Are we going? What are we doing? So I told her, I said, you know what? Screw it. We love it here. We're just going to stay. We're going to anchor down. We bought 5 acres outside of Ann Arbor. We started building a new house. We were like, we're just going to stay put. This is comfy. I got a great team I work with. They take really good care of us. The benefits are amazing. My wife was a pediatric nurse at the University of Michigan Hospital, which is a level 4 NICU, which they deal with some really sick babies. She in terms of not only her professional fulfillment, but her continued education, it was just a stellar place to be. So I got news on New Year's Day, 2017, that my father had passed away. We were actually up in northern Michigan visiting some of my stepdad's family, playing in the snow. And we got the call, so I was like, well, we need to head back to Ann Arbor. We'll load up. And I knew we were going to have to clear my dad's house out. So I was like, we're going to have to drive down. So we put myself, my wife, and at the time, Grayson, I think, was 2 or 3. And we loaded up the truck and drove down to Texas, like 23 hours or something. And on the way down, I got an email from a third-party recruiter telling me about this opportunity with the UFC. And I briefly looked at it. I didn't even bring it up to my wife. I just left it alone. And then a couple days later, as we're dealing with all our family affairs, I showed it to her. I was like, hey, take a look at this. This came through the other day. We're going to be here for another 5 or 6 days. Just at some point, you let me know what you think or if we need to look at it or whatever. So we just kind of went silent on it for a few days. And then on the drive back home, we got like 20 miles outside of Ann Arbor. And then out of nowhere, she like pulls up the email. She's like, hey, I think you need to give these guys a call and at least kind of see what they have to say. I was like, really? And she's like, yeah, knowing that we're like 3 months into a build on a new house, new piece of property, all that kind of stuff. I was like, really? I would have never fathomed my wife would ask me to do that. So she was like, yeah, let's just look at it. And I was like, okay. So I called them up and that kind of spearheaded the whole thing, had some great conversations. I learned a lot about what they were trying to do as an organization, which had many levels of just interest to it, from developing the first ever health and wellness resources for athletes, not only to preserve their careers and their bodies, but also to enhance performance and put out a better product into what is already the most elite fighting league in the world. And it was just really intriguing and it had never been done. So it had been, I started thinking to myself, what other sporting venue that's mainstream, that is worldwide, global, who's just now knocking on the door of performance, what other opportunity will I ever get to be on the ground floor of something like that? And the answer, I just couldn't come up with a good one. You just don't know. You can't predict those things when the next elite sport is going to burst onto the scene, and you'll have a chance to kind of debut all of the data gathering and diagnostics around what it takes to be successful in that sport. So as we're going through the process and it started getting a little more serious, me and my wife had to have a serious conversation if we were going to abandon this house and this property and try to figure out how to sell that and move on. And these are all uncharted waters that we'd never been in before. Not to mention, we didn't know anything about Las Vegas. The only thing we knew about Vegas was the Strip. So where do you raise a family at? Do they have? My oldest son is on the autism spectrum. What were our resources going to be like in Las Vegas? Because at that point, we'd built up a ton of resources in Michigan that were fantastic for him. So, there was a lot that went into, incredible professional opportunity, but there's obviously, your family is first and foremost. And is this a good move for us? And my wife was just a freaking badass assistant coach in this whole thing with helping me figure out that this was a good opportunity and we needed to jump on it. So we did. And, the team that they assimilated at the UFCPI was one of the biggest attractants for me. Our director of performance, Dr. Duncan French, first and foremost, whom I had been familiar with the previous few years as he was at the University of Notre Dame. So I was very familiar with what he was building there. Also went through a short little mini recruiting process there as well, as they were looking to add to their staff. So I got to get some insight on what he was building there and what they were doing and how they were going about it. So I already kind of had an understanding of him, and I knew that he'd be someone that I could be a strong colleague with. And then once I looked at the caliber of the PTs they were bringing in, the sports dietitians, I was just like, wow, like this, as awesome as people might think I am, I was flattered because I was like, I'm going to be around some incredible people that I can continue to learn a lot of stuff from. So you're being invited to be on the dream team. Perfect. Exactly. I mean, it was beautiful, right? So we got out here in April of 2017, And we opened the doors on the first ever UFC Performance Institute in May of 2017 with a kind of a grand opening. We had an athlete retreat that weekend. So we brought, I don't know how many it was, a couple hundred fighters from the roster from around the globe that came and got to debut the facility with us. And then the next week we were operational. We were running diagnostics on fighters and trying to get involved in their fight plans and letting them understand how they can use a resource like us. And here we are 2.5 years later. And as you know, we just completed another build with that incredible facility that Sorinex partnered with us on out in Shanghai.
Heck yeah, man. It's so exciting. Like you said, seeing such a large exploding brand like the UFC, not only being so successful, but taking the human performance so seriously that they're willing to put the dollars behind it and the research to get the right personnel. You know, I mean, and one reason, okay, I understand, and we got an idea why they started the initial PI. Why did the UFC feel like they had to make an international PI? Why did they choose Shanghai?
Sure. Well, I think the initiative in the beginning always, and this has been Dana's and his team's one of their side agendas for years, is to grow the sport, which they've done tremendously over the years. We have a roster that averages around 600 constantly, 600 professional fighters worldwide, trying to get on one of our 42 events a year. And some of these fighters are fighting up to 3 and 4 times a year. So it's important that the sport continues to grow, to continue to provide opportunities for fighters to compete. And then obviously from a financial standpoint, the more pay-per-views and the more big events that we can showcase in major cities across the world, the more financially beneficial it is for the company. And so one of the biggest markets that I would say wasn't being tapped into as much is the APAC market, the APAC region and the Chinese market. So that was kind of their initiative behind growing that direction. MMA is still not just as mainstream in China as they would like to see it. And so if you're going to grow, why not dive into a place that's got, I don't know, what is it, 1.5 billion people, almost 2 billion people that are there. And so a little different operation there. Obviously, we do want to grow our elite fighters that are there. I think we have around 9 or 10 of them that are on the roster currently. One of them who will be competing for a championship, Weili Zhang, who will be fighting Valentina Shevchenko in the near future in Shenzhen in China. So that's a big event, and we want to see more big events debuted across that APAC region. So there's only a handful of prominent MMA gyms across that region. So we've debuted our academy model in that facility as well. So we've handpicked a handful of MMA coaches to run that facility. We have a head MMA coach. He has an assistant as well as a jiu-jitsu coach and a striking coach. We had around 40 MMA fighters from the APAC region that were hand selected to compete in our first ever athlete combine. To essentially we ended up selecting about 26 of them to then be academy residents. So they're living in some housing quarters we have right next to the PI. So they're living there full time, full dose of MMA training, strength and conditioning, sports science, nutrition, and physical therapy that's structured into their world throughout the week. So they're now, let's see, what date is it? The 8th. We're now into, I think, their fourth full week in the academy.
That was something that was amazing to see when I was there a couple of weeks ago. And you told me about some of those athletes, and it was mind blowing that, you had some from Tibet and some, some different far off places that had dirt floors. There were sheep, there were shepherds or different jobs with very, very little technology, no infrastructure to training, no infrastructure to health, wellness, anything like that. And you had one kid, I believe you said it was a long, arduous process just to get to China, much less to get to invite it to start fighting, much less to get to the combine, much less. Do these kids feel like they must be on literally a different planet? And I call them kids because they're whether they're teens and 20s, but they have to feel like they're on a different planet with they have this food. I mean, the place is absolutely world class. I mean, I've been into a ton of performance institutes or performance centers, you have an amazing weight room, you have an amazing recovery area, you have food, you have everything that you may need. How big of a shock is it for these kids? And tell about some of the some of the context of some of these athletes. In my opinion, was tear jerking just to see someone who has such a violent upshifting in their potential for what they could do in their life. The learning curve and the experience curve has to be almost at neck break speeds for them.
Yeah, there was no doubt that they were all just ecstatic, first and foremost, of the opportunity to get to compete in the combine. So the level of hunger in terms of how well they wanted to succeed when they were competing through that combine was like nothing I've ever seen. I mean, because you're right. There are a lot of them that are coming from very poverty-stricken scenarios. Some not so much, but there were definitely quite a few that were. We had quite a few that came from an orphanage upbringing, or they came from just low-income housing, and now all of a sudden, yes, they're in the state-of-the-art facility, and someone's saying, "Hey, we need to see your skills as a martial artist, and we're going to measure all your physiological attributes, and based on your potential, your age range, your coachability, we're going to determine whether or not we can develop you to fight in some higher leagues and potentially have a shot at competing at, say, a contender series, or maybe even taking a short notice fight within the UFC one day." That's kind of it. And they were just blown away at the opportunity. I think the hunger part of it, and just wanting to be successful because they've been through such hard times in their lives and they've worked so hard to get to where they were. It didn't matter what the test was. If we had them doing a 3-minute glycolytic test on a bike, or we're doing a mid-thigh isometric pull for maximal effort, they were trying to exemplify just how much integrity they had, not only in their efforts, but in their physicality. And I mean, you watch NFL Combine, you see things, and guys get motivated by money and all these different things. And that's kind of what we saw. But they were motivated by an opportunity to one day fight at this elite league, that for them and where they're at is very rare. It's just difficult for them to get there. Logistics, financially, even to just get the exposure, it's difficult. And here we are, we're having this sort of physical combine for them to go through. And I mean, they came in just trying to murder it to the point where our testing results were so skewed, because we have fighters in our league that run through these tests all the time.
Interesting.
Data gathering, and we're like, wow, some of these scores are ridiculous. Well, also when our fighters are running through it that are in our league, it's typically one-on-one. So it'd be me and a fighter one-on-one running through the testing. He doesn't have 30 other hungry dudes standing around him screaming and yelling, pumping him up.
Wow.
And the kind of background motivation that they have to get out of some of their upbringing. So it was unique to see the psychological side of what that kind of motivation can do for your performance, because they were hungry, man, and they were showing it.
Oh, that's wildly interesting. So now, how did you guys interpret that data? Did you have to kind of put it in a jar and say, okay, this data is really only viable within this context of these 30 athletes because of the situation they're in? Or could you put that against, say, a Conor McGregor and go, okay, well, gosh, this guy's the next super champ, but maybe not, right?
We're going to have to use some, and our sports science team is working on it now, where we're going to have to use some different algorithms and things, some different equations to normalize the data, because some of it, even though it was beyond expectations in terms of some of the performances, we don't know what the consistency will be like. So we're going to continue gathering that data. They're going to be there for the next 6 months. So we're going to see, does that start to drop off? Is it dropping off because they're overtrained or tired, or because they're settling in now and they're not quite as blown away with excitement and opportunity as they were previously? We don't know, but we're going to have to kind of dive into that. And as you said, keep the data separated a little bit until we know more about it. Data accumulation it's a maturity thing. You got to wait for that data to mature over time. And nonetheless, it was pretty special to watch, and we were excited to see their performances when they were going through it.
Wow, that's awesome. And now, how does this facility and how does this change the career of a fighter? Work training at a place, or what's the prediction? And I guess you've had data now for a couple of years with the PI in Vegas. Like, has it done what you expected it would do and your staff would expect it would do, or have there been some surprises that this experiment and this project has opened up to you within the fighting world?
Sure. In the beginning, the expectation, and it still is the expectation, is, we're here to help save fights. I mean, that as blunt as I can say it, providing resources that are providing structure and ingenuity around programming to where fighters are making weight easier and more consistently, and they're not getting injured doing silly stuff during training camps. So
it's literally as simple as that, saving fights. So would you say that was the biggest challenge, or is there still a bigger challenge?
That was kind of the initiative that got this thing started in the beginning. They were like, okay, we're leaking money. Where are we leaking money from? Oh, well, these 7 cards during this year dropped either their main or co-main event due to injury or missing weight. What are we doing to provide solutions for that? And the answer was nothing. So that's where the concept kind of got generated. And then over the next 2 years, they really put the pen to paper and figuring out the best solution. And that's when the PI was born. Now, while that is still an initiative of ours, that is kind of that's why we spend the money and investing in these facilities and all these resources for feeding these fighters and all this kind of stuff, is to save fights. But also we're trying to shift the culture in terms of how they prepare to be a professional fighter, and which we're trying to turn that into more of the mindset around it's an 8-week sport right now. And, there's companies and books out there that they're titling themselves like 8 weeks out and 8 weeks to championships and 8 weeks this. We're trying to kind of abolish that kind of language to where they're thinking more like a 52-week-a-year professional athlete. When is your off-camp training period, and what are you focusing on during that time to maximize training camp? Whereas traditionally, they'll use training camp to get in shape for a fight. Well, we want them to raise their standards to say, what are we doing during the off-camp period to get ready for training camp so that you can actually sharpen your sword during training camp?
Right, not just try to get back to a level that was acceptable to walk into the ring. And is that really what the culture of the fight world was, is kind of walk and do what you're going to do like a normal dude all year? And then when it was, like you said, 8 weeks out, all of a sudden it was time to go?
In a lopsided way, yes. Now, don't get me wrong. There are a handful out there that throughout the years, these training camps have figured out better ways to do it, but it's definitely not it's more of the exception. That has been something that we've had to spend a lot of time and conversations on with these fighters as we're assisting through camps and during off-camp periods, is one, objectifying what your goals are. Like, what are we actually trying to do? Why are you lifting weights? Why are you running? What's the goal? Oh, I don't know, because that's what fighters do. And it's more of, hey, let's start out with a good diagnostic battery, so where we can say, okay, physiologically, here's your capabilities. Here's what you're trying to do in your fight. Now, here's the weight class you're competing in. So here's what you have to expect in terms of fight duration, number of scrambles, number of average strikes thrown per minute. We have these statistics to tell us kind of what it takes to win in a certain division. And then we have other statistics around finishing rates. How many and what weight class, what's the prediction of finishing rate? Most of our heavyweight fights are finished within the first minute of the first round or first couple minutes in the first round. Most of our men's flyweight fights at 125 go the distance to a decision. So, they're different.
Is that just based on ratio of power per what your face could take kind of thing?
Based on a culmination of statistics taken from thousands of fights, literally since the beginning of the UFC. So we have these statistics across every fight that's ever been hosted. Now that data has been normalized, especially since they instituted the rules around 5-minute rounds, weight classes, because in the beginning there weren't any weight classes. And as you know, Hoist Gracie and Ken Shamrock fighting for like 32 minutes straight, those days are over. So so ever since that, the unified rules and all, and all of that had been established, we have all those statistics that tell us, and that's what's kind of in the journal that we published, that tell us, okay, here's what it takes to win in your respective weight class. And once we're able to measure that up with your physiological capabilities, now let's have a conversation. What do we want to focus on? Because you might have 9 different weaknesses for your weight class. But if we've got 10 weeks to prepare for a fight or 8 weeks to prepare for a fight, we need to figure out what are the top 2 or 3, and let's go after those. Then in the off-camp period, maybe we'll go after number 4, 5, and 6. And so just having this structured conversation around a progressive mode of getting better, this is a brand new language to a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them. And this is the culture that we're trying to instill, just a more objective training culture into the sport.
Right. Right. So now during this process, what is like the biggest challenge that you have with the, now that you got the infrastructure, you got the team, you got an education model that's happening. I'm sure there's still challenges that arise during this process. Is it, not throwing shade. I would think it would just be, to be a fighter, you got to be a little different in the head. And I would think, managing some different mentalities and emotions might be difficult. I know throwers are generally crazy and sometimes just stuff gets broken. And that's, how it is I would think there would be some challenges that might arise that are maybe wouldn't be considered on paper, that maybe like, oh, well, here's just one of those things. And, I don't want you to throw anyone under the bus, but is there anything that you found that makes it difficult? Is there scheduling, or like what is the toughest part about your job?
I would say in the beginning, the toughest part is logistics, especially when you're dealing with a fighter that's in the top 5. The other half of their income comes from appearances, emotional things, different interviews, and, you name it. So just getting the time to get them here, especially if they don't train here locally, if they live in New York or if they live in Russia or whatever, getting them here so we can run through a diagnostic battery, so we can evaluate what their training plan is, and then team up with them to be able to offer some interventional strategies. That's a hard part in itself. Once we've kind of gone over those hurdles, I would say the next challenge is around selling, not all, but some coaching staffs on just how effectively we can supplement what they already have going on. So we don't do too much changing of their training plans and how they prepare for fights. Instead, we try to find strategic ways to, in an integrated fashion, employ strategies around strength conditioning, strategies around sports dietetics, strategies around physical therapy and interventions to limit overuse injuries in the shoulders and the hips and the feet, which we see quite a bit with fighters. Now, once you get through that and you actually have tangibles to say, okay, here's what we're going to focus on and here's what we're going to implement. The mentality side, we call that you're referring to, those are the X factors. That's what makes them special. If you watched Jorge Masvidal's fight with Ben Askren this past weekend, what he displayed was an X factor. You don't want to coach some of the meanness and some of the instincts. You don't want to coach that out of that guy. You don't want to over water down with getting him to overthink things because he's becoming overly analytical. This is where
kind of staying in the lizard brain world.
Exactly. And
just the attack mode.
And so I tell our professional, especially in the strength and conditioning side, we need to be extremely versatile, meaning there are some fighters that we're going to be really intellectual with. They want to know the why. They thrive off of that. You want to get really deep into discussions. There's others, they don't need to know the why. They just need the workplace in front of them. They need the prescription and the direction. And then when they're done with their 60 or 90-minute session or whatever, they're going to get out and they're going to go practice punching people in the teeth again. So, their approach is all very different. So we have to be adaptable in how we're delivering so that we don't water down those X factors that make them so special. The same thing with balance and proprioception. Well, one of the things that may be special about a guy who maybe leads the league in head kick knockouts might be because he's not perfectly symmetrical through his hip. So if we spend all this time making him perfectly symmetrical through his hip girdle, now all of a sudden he can't throw these kicks the way he was at the velocities that he was.
Right. Maybe he just had a really heavy leg with that off balance or something.
We want to make sure that our supplementation is driven by the coaching strategies. And that's where this versatility and this adaptability that I preach about to our professionals comes into play. Yes, I need to get him stronger, but I want to make sure the strength I provide is supplementing his strengths and nullifying some of his weaknesses. But I need to be aware that if I go about it the wrong way, I can definitely nullify some of his strengths and exacerbate some of his weaknesses. So, this is where it's got to be a very in-tune discussion with the fighter and the fight team. so that I'm not overstepping my boundaries thinking like, oh, this guy's got poor stability on his left knee. I'm going to fix that right up. Well, this dude's a grappler and he likes to get into a rubber guard position and choke people from the bottom. So he needs his knee to have that kind of dexterity. You know what I mean? So
Wow.
we just need to be very aware. We keep talking about the word context. We need to be very aware of the context and where we can be utilized and have the greatest utility when we're supplementing these fighters.
Wow. It's not, yeah, that's fantastic. It's not a place to have an ego as a strength coach. You're like, well, I got this guy good doing this, or I really like this exercise. I would think you have to get so far past that and be very mature to see what the athlete needs at that point. And those idiosyncrasies, like you said, aren't always a detraction. Sometimes they are the X factor and that little weird thing that allowed, like if you remember in the powerlifting world, Lamar Gant, one of the best powerlifters of all time, had really, really, really severe scoliosis, but because of it, his spine would squinch down like an accordion. And I can't remember the amount of weight that he had, 4 or 5 times body weight, just something absolutely ridiculous deadlift. Still one of the best powerlifters of all time, but had you been able to fix his back, he probably wouldn't have been that good. And that was one of those things. So, that's wild. Now I know you have some. Let's talk about some hardware. You have some different parts and pieces within the facility. Let's just talk about the Shanghai facility, because that was kind of the cutting edge, what we've seen and done most recently. What parts and pieces in there have been specifically designed for you guys, or things that you use in a specific way? I know there's, you have mid-thigh pull force plates in the floor. You have, a new cloud, the dog bone hanging from the ceiling. I saw some different ways that you guys were utilizing that. Like there are a lot of pieces and parts that I really enjoyed watching. The heavy intent and intentionality is the biggest thing in designing a weight room or a performance center, but also running a performance center. So give us some of the intent behind some of the hardware and reasons why you chose it, or reasons what you're doing with it.
Well, number one is I cannot sit here and preach about versatility and adaptability with my coaches if I don't give them spaces where they can be that in them. So, yes, we need to be able to do the fundamentals of pushing and pulling and extending and flexing in various planes of motion. And so those are easy, right? But then I need to be able to let my coaches tap into every genre of training if they need to, whether it be gymnastics or whether it be suspension trainers or whether it be cardiovascular work. And sometimes some of that is just good old fashioned open space. So when we had the discussion, for one, the dog bone is one of the most crazy, insane engineering feats that I've ever seen, first off. And I remember when we had the discussion, I said, look, I need a suspension system in the ceiling for pull-ups, monkey bars, dropping down suspensions trainers, you name it. But here's the caveat. It's a 65-year-old building and I don't want any floor support. So we need to hang it from the ceiling. And so
that was a crazy request.
Right. So the intent and the why was I need open floor space. We're going to lay mats out on the floor and do some tumbling and some rolling around. I can't have columns and pillars all over the place. So that was kind of the why. Now you guys provided the solution with just the crazy ass engineering. It looks like the damn Golden Gate Bridge hanging from the ceiling with all the supports.
A similar amount of engineering.
Since day one, all I've heard from you guys, from Camp House, from Gazella, from Serban, is, hey, just letting you know, we over-engineer everything. And, I think you guys told us, we could comfortably hang like 20 or 22 200-pound guys from that thing at the same time. I'm pretty sure we can invert a damn 18-wheeler and hang it from that thing, because it does not
stud.
Move, man. It is impressive. So, that was a thought process behind that. I want the open floor space so our coaches can get creative, but at the same time, I need to be able to do stuff from a suspension apparatus for climbing and gripping and upper body strength endurance. And
you even had them do a warm up with different touches and jumps that I was watching them train. Like, you guys were really utilizing it well, but that's the key that you're saying, was that open space. I think that's the first thing that you see when you come in the PI and the training side, is just the open space.
A good versatile floor that offers traction, but It's also accommodating over time. So our coach is going to be standing in there for hours and hours. So it's got enough cushion to it where it's not going to wreck you. But if we need to be reactive off of it and do agilities on it and jump on it, we don't got to worry about it scuffing and tearing.
Sure.
That's a key feature. I mean, that's one of the biggest investments you make in a weight room is the flooring, and that was a big piece to it. And then when you look at the Uber packages we put together with the racks, again, the backbone of the why is versatility and adaptability, being able to press and push and pull in varieties of planes using the adjustable jammer arms. Being able to run, we have an academy of 26 athletes. We're also going to be the home for several training camps coming out of different COC groups, as well as we've already had some premier soccer league teams in there, rugby union from the UK has been through there. So there's big populations of athletes coming through. So being able to have the base camp racks where someone can be inside utilizing a piece, somebody can be on the outside utilizing a piece, someone can be in between using the bridges that connect the two. It just offers a lot of versatility when you have big groups going on, which they needed as well. We needed the one-on-one intimate sort of training area, but we also needed the ability to run the masses through there. And that's kind of what it accommodates both.
Oh man, you guys did a wonderful job. I mean, you guys guided us through your needs, and it was a fun project. But
yeah, I mean, it's unprecedented in so many ways in terms of you helped us fulfill one of our biggest core missions, which is integration into all of our other spaces. So the proximity of things to our PT clinic and how they flow together, the proximity of our diagnostics lab / hypoxic lab and how that flows together, the integrated pieces in the MMA floor from the custom suspension frame that you guys did for our bag area where our heavy bags are hanging and our speed bags. All of that stuff comes into play with how to better utilize the space for our MMA training as well. The turf area, not only the quality of the turf, but the flow. We have impact walls down on the end. We're able to bungee in and utilize raptors and clip on different soft tissue attachments onto those walls and things. I mean, just again, we have that jumbo staircase right next to it. It's just a lot of versatility. So regardless of what our training objectives may be now compared to 5 years from now, it just allows us to grow into that because it's got a lot of variety in the room.
Yes. Oh man, it was super cool to see just how well thought out it was. And in working with you guys, you had so much great insight to dimensions of things and where you saw it going. It's a fun project when the customer is so well, like I said, just well versed on what they want and the reasons why. It was, I appreciate it. It was definitely educational for us. Well, I know we're right at the end. I know you have to get back to work. I wanted to ask a couple quick things.
Go for it.
I know you and I have shared some music on text back and forth. I know we're both music buffs. Tell us some of your favorite music you're listening to now, your favorite reads or of books, and kind of what, when you're not talking training, when you're not living training and the world of punching people in the face. What does Bo like to do in his off time, and give us some of your inspiration?
I'll tell you, man, it's funny. Duncan actually was clowning me the other day just because of some of the transitions that I've gone through. When you grew up in the South, I mean, I grew up listening to bluegrass and Hank Williams Sr. and Johnny Cash and all that kind of stuff, and I still love it to this day. Then you come out here and you get a little West Coast vibe, and it's very different. So listening to more reggae. I'm listening to more different styles of rock. And 10 years ago, I couldn't tell you one techno song. And now we're listening to all this like EDM and electronic.
Oh, y'all crush the EDM now. Come on.
It's crazy. But honestly, it's funny how your life works in phases. So right now, I'm listening to a ton of Meghan Trainor because my son has learned how to request Meghan Trainor on Alexa in our home audio system. So I'm hearing literally the time we wake up, Daddy, I'm playing Meghan Trainor, and then she's on. Or we're listening to like the Trolls soundtrack, which has a lot of Justin Timberlake on it and stuff. So whether it's willingly or not, I'm listening to a lot of that right now. But in terms of books and things, I'm starting to dive more into, I went through a phase where I was reading a lot of leadership books and things like that while I was at Michigan. I was trying to learn how to be a manager and learn how to be more of a leadership figure to help those beneath me and those above me kind of flow a little bit better. And, I've always wanted to be the kind of person, if I was going to be put in a leadership role, I don't really want them to think of me that way. I want them to think of me like I'm standing right beside them, not that I'm standing up in front of them. That's just kind of how I would prefer to be perceived. I don't need to be someone's boss per se. I even, try to tell them like, no, you don't even need to call me boss. Just call me Bo. That's good. But now that's kind of shifted into where here we've been able to study some pretty interesting things. I've been diving in here recently. We had Brian McKenzie out and his group visit us around breathing, and that has opened up some doors. There's only a handful of select groups across the world that are diving into a deeper understanding of breathing. And when you look at it fundamentally, it's the first thing you do when you're born. It's the last thing you do before you die. There are there's some information that suggests that it can fluctuate and determine how you're utilizing certain substrates. Not to mention you're shifting and transitioning through different states of consciousness, whether you're going from waking up in the morning and getting activated for a workout, or just got done with a workout and now trying to cool down, and trying to shift from sympathetic to more parasympathetic, depending on what type of work we're doing. It's very interesting to me. I don't know anything about it. I'm just kind of in its infancy. I know there's some others out there that have studied it pretty thoroughly. So right now I'm literally trying to dig into as much research and papers around not only breathing from a performance standpoint, but from a therapeutic standpoint, and how it revolves around recovery.
Yes.
So I don't have a ton of great examples right now, but to give you specific books and articles, but that's kind of what my little obsession is right now, diving into that.
Yeah, it sounds like kind of like a Laird Hamilton XPT life kind of deal.
It is,
which is definitely one of those things I want to. That's a bucket list event for me. We might need to go together.
Yeah, that's a rough life, right? I think they go out to Kauai or something, and
that sounds pretty good.
And, I mean, it sounds like a pretty awesome pleasure cruise. But I know they get the work done, and I mean the reviews, people have ranted and raved about it. So it's a pretty gnarly thing that they got going on.
Oh, absolutely.
And then honestly, man, for me, in terms of people are like, oh, what are you reaching out to resource wise, or what are you reading and what are you doing those things? I selfishly have to say I've got some unbelievable colleagues here, and I'm trying to, as we free up, we're coming off this big Shanghai project, and while we're still busy, we have more opportunities now to kind of dive into some deeper discussions and learn from each other. So I just ran through a full battery of nutritional diagnostics with Clint Wattenberg, our director of nutrition. Everything from looking at my resting metabolic rate to looking at my substrate utilization. Not for sure, it's going to benefit my own personal health, but to dive into a deeper understanding of why he's programming things like he is and how it supplements the training that I'm providing. So that, for me, that's another huge educational experience. And so I'm going to continue trying to dive into those with our different service providers. With Heather Linden around, she uses a lot of different techniques in a lot of her rehab protocols, especially with low back injuries, hip injuries, things like that. So, I'm going to use a lot of our downtime to kind of pull her aside and get her to educate me on some of these things. So as much as books and all these things are great resources, and I would always encourage people to reach out and find those, I'm going to spend some of this time in the next 6 months or so really diving into this ridiculous staff that we have here. I feel like I'm doing an injustice. They're sitting right next to me, and I need to get some free time and really get to pick their brain, because they're just outstanding at what they do.
Oh, that's very, very smart. It's not only supporting those right around you, but utilizing the closest, and more that you understand what they're doing, the better you guys could work together. That's awesome. Right. So speaking of reaching out, if people got to get a hold of you or watch what you're doing, tell them how to do that, and let's go from there.
Yeah, 100%. They can find me on Instagram, Bo.Sandoval. And then, I haven't used Twitter in so long.
Yeah, no one does that.
But so the PI is located in Las Vegas. I tell people this all the time. I don't know if they think I'm bullshitting when I say it, but if you're ever in town and you are a practitioner, you are interested in the performance game, definitely reach out. You know, we offer up tours. We do like to talk shop. We've got Summer League basketball in town right now, so we've had a ton of teams come through with their performance teams. There's been some great collaborations, speaking with their medical directors, strength and conditioning coaches, PTs, you name it. So that's been a blast, but our doors are always open. We have a huge welcome mat. So some take us up on it, not all of them, but it's always a resource. If you're a performance professional and you're in town, definitely hit us up. Other than that, we do have a sometimes informative website. I think we need to update it a little bit right now, but UFCPI.com is another place where you can get a little bit of information. And then if you follow the UFCPI on Instagram as well, we're constantly posting things that we're involved in or that we're projects that we're working on. So that can be a good resource to figure out what's going on behind these doors as well.
Awesome, Bo. And I can speak from experience that, you know, even before we were working together, you were very gracious and had me come to the PI when I was in town for SHOT Show. And I know a number of other people have gone by and seen you, and it's a wonderful experience. I would highly suggest anyone to do it if you have time.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I was going to say, I think up to this point now, we had you out. Brandon Lilly came out a couple times. You know, Laura Zara came, took the tour. She was kind of blown away. I was like, you know, this ain't exactly living out in the wild, but it's pretty cool. You know?
Yeah, you had air conditioning, you had a floor, it had all types of things for her.
You know, Scott Puckett came out too. I got some really cool insights from him just around the tactical world and things. But yeah, the doors are always open. Definitely come say hi, reach out to us.
Thanks a ton, Bo. Well, for Bo Sandoval, Bert Sorin, and the rest of us here at Sorinex, thank you so much. Go live life and be legendary. Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming, Bo.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Bert. Pleasure.